morning and welcome to 27 Minutes here on WJTS 27. Dubois County Republicans met last night at the Huntingburg Event Center for the annual Lincoln Day dinner. The guest speaker was former 9th District Congressman Mike Sodrel, who is the lone Republican candidate heading into the primary and is on course for a bid to retake the office from Barron Hill. Sodrel spoke on a variety of topics at that dinner.
You know, with the Honorable Judge Brown sitting here, I couldn't help but think about a story that I heard. It was almost 100 years ago. When cars were first coming into vogue, and you still had horses and wagons run along with the cars, and they were having this bench trial. There had been a traffic accident, and the farmer had sued for damages and his physical injuries, and the policeman that was the investigating officer had testified first, and he said, I talked to this gentleman at the scene of the accident, and I asked him specifically, are you okay? And he said, never felt better. So the judge looked down and she asked the plaintiff, did you in fact tell this officer that you never felt better? Yes, ma'am. And now you're in the court and you're suing for damages? Yes, ma'am. Well, can you explain that? Yes, ma'am. He said, I can. I was in this wagon and the car hit my horse and it turned the wagon over. And he said the officer came up and he saw the horse was in a lot of pain and obviously had a broken leg. He said he got his service revolver out and he shot the horse. And the wagon had fallen on my dog. It was riding with me, and he said he could tell the dog was in a lot of misery, and so he went up and he shot the dog. And he said, then he walked up to me and he said, are you feeling okay? He said, I never felt better. Sometimes things are not exactly what they seem. Well, it's official. I am your candidate for the 9th District seat. No one filed to run in the primary election. You know, I'm asked from time to time, why are you doing this? Why would you run again? Well, I believe in 2008, we're definitely going to have change in America. I think people are going to demand it. But the trajectory that we set our republic on in 2008 is going to affect our children and our grandchildren. They are either going to reap the rewards or suffer the consequences of the decisions that we make in the 2008 election. The election's not about me or my opponent or even about Barack Obama or John McCain or Hillary Clinton. The election is about the direction that the country is taking. It's about the future of the republic. You know, since 1776, America has been a world leader. We have led the world in governance, we led the world in innovation, and we led the world in industry. From Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence, to Thomas Edison and the light bulb, to Henry Ford and mass production, the United States has led the world. Now, when I hear a lot of people talk about change today, when the new left, as I call it, talks about change, they want change, all right. They want America to be a follower for a change. They want us to follow the Canadians into socialized medicine. They want us to follow the Europeans into secular socialism. I mean, if you get beyond the nice words and the flowery speeches and listen to where we're going. You know, it's when the Clinton administration was considering national health care, you know, when Bill Clinton was president of the United States, I had a driver come up to me and he said, you know, that national health care, he said, that sounds like a pretty good deal. You know, I mean, I think there's a lot of people could probably use that. And just for the record, at the time, we were paying 100% of the cost of a of the health care for a family plan. So it wasn't that he needed it, he just thought somebody could use it. And I said, you know, Jerome, I said, if you were to ask me today, there's two places that I am confident you could find a lion. If you went in the country of Kenya and Africa and you go out to Serengeti, you'll look around long enough, you're going to find a lion. Or you can just drive across the bridge here to the Louisville Zoo. Now, the zoo lion doesn't have to worry about being food or finding food. They come along and chuck the food in there 3 or 4 times a day, and he's got water and he's got shelter. And if he gets the sniffles, he's got health care. And the only thing the lion had to give up to get all that was his liberty. And as Americans, we are building this cage one bar at a time. And we're not going to notice till the door slams shut. You know, a lot of these things sound really good. You know, General Patton said, you can't lead troops from the rear. That's the reason the motto of the infantry was follow me. Well, you can't lead the world that way either. And you can't really talk about America's future without at least taking a short look at the past. You know, when Michelle Obama recently said this was the first time that she was proud of her country, it was a little upsetting to me. I think it shows a lack of respect for millions of Americans who fought and died and paid a price to make America what it is today. America is a unique country, beginning at our founding. You know, I'm not sure you really thought about this, but the American Revolution is one of the very few revolutions ever started on planet Earth by people that had something to lose. The Bolsheviks didn't have anything to lose. The Sandinistas didn't have anything to lose. Most of the time, revolutions are started by people that have nothing to lose. When the founders signed at the bottom of the Declaration of Independence, we pledged to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. They didn't use the term fortunes figuratively. Alexander Hamilton was the Bill Gates of his day, arguably the richest man in America. Thomas Jefferson had 2 5,000-acre plantations. You can still go look at Monticello in Charlottesville, Virginia. George Washington has a very nice home in Mount Vernon that still stands, and people can go see it today. So these are people that had something to lose. They weren't people that started a revolution that had nothing to lose. But the thing that's most significant about these people is they gave up power voluntarily. You know, King George said of George Washington at the conclusion of the Revolutionary War, he said, if he voluntarily gives up power, he's the greatest man in the world. Mao Zedong did not mount a revolution in China to give liberty to the Chinese people. He did it to achieve power, and he kept power till he died. Lenin and Stalin did not prosecute a revolution in the Soviet Union to give liberty to the Russian people. Stalin kept power till he died. Fidel Castro didn't carry on a revolution in Cuba to rescue the Cuban people from Batista. He replaced Batista and has been in power for 50 years. George Washington gave up power twice. At the conclusion of the war, his soldiers said, "We will make you king." And he said, "If you ever speak of it again, I will have you court-martialed and hung." And he went into the Continental Congress, presented his sword, and said, like Cincinnatus, "I'm going back to sit under my fig and vine." And he went back to Mount Vernon. They then called upon him to participate in the Constitutional Convention, which he did. He chaired it. And then they said, "You have to be president of the United States." And he did. "And you have to run for re-election," and he did. And then they said, "You have to run again," and he said, "No. I don't think any president should serve more than 2 terms. I'm going back to Mount Vernon." And he did. And every president from George Washington, every 2-term president from George Washington up to FDR, gave up power voluntarily. I mean, this is a critical difference between American Revolution and the American system and the rest of the world. Now, when FDR refused to give up power until he died, he scared his own party bad enough that they amended the Constitution in 1951 to ensure that no president would succeed himself more than one term. And we probably need something similar for members of Congress. I have to tell you, and I'm not picking on any particular congressman, but Congressman Dingell is the longest serving member of the House. He has been in Congress 52 years. You know, people don't voluntarily give up power anymore. They give it up when they've reached room temperature or when the Constitution requires it. You know, I really believe that, and I've thought a lot about it. I think if you exempt the people that are there now, or grandfather them in, if you want to call it that, I don't think you can get them to vote themselves out of office. But if they were grandfathered in, you might be able to get term limits passed for future office holders, and at least our children would have somebody with term limits. You know, there's an old country saying, a new broom sweeps clean. Well, they got too many old brooms in the closet up there. But, you know, when I never intended to stay forever. You know, when I married my wife 40 years ago, I took her till death do us part. I never made that kind of commitment to this congressional seat. I just, you know, like the founders of this country, I don't covet power. I cherish liberty. And that's what they were all about. We fought a revolution to obtain it. We fought a civil war to extend it to the balance of our citizens. And we fought world wars to defend it. And it would be a real shame and an insult, in my mind, to those that went before us to now give it up at the ballot box. You know, I'm trying to write a book right now. It's the title of it is Citizen Sheep, Government Shepherds. You can think about that a minute. But it's an attempt to explain to people the difference between our system and other systems. An attempt to explain what a constitutional republic is. You know, we stood up and you say pledge allegiance to the flag. You don't say unto the democracy for which it stands. You say unto the republic for which it stands. In fact, Thomas Jefferson would use a term that sounds very funny to us now. He called people Democratic Republicans at a time when they're typically Democrats or Republicans. What he meant was the person believed in a constitutional republic with democratically elected officials. They believed in a limited government. We seem to think today that government is unlimited, that government can do virtually anything. Their founders didn't believe that. And that's why they settled on rule of law. They were tired of snob rule. They didn't want to be ruled by kings any longer, but they didn't trust mob rule. That's why they settled on rule of law. They didn't want to be ruled by people at all. They wanted to be ruled by a document. And it might be a little helpful, Eric talked about the talk at Rotary this morning, to go back 1,000 years. Pick your Bible up and read it. People believed in the divine right of kings for thousands of years. If you read through the Bible, you find monarchs ruled by one. Call them Pharaoh, call them king, queen, emperor, empress. It's still ruled by one person. That one person was the executive, judicial, and legislative branch of government. They couldn't violate the law. They were the law. Well, at a place called Runnymede in 1215, a group of nobles decided they didn't like that system very well. So they stuck a sword to King John's throat and said, King, we want some of your power. Here, sign this. King John signed the Magna Carta. So England went from rule by one, monarchy, to rule by a group, oligarchy. And that evolved into the British Parliament that you have today. When Thomas Jefferson wrote King George, he said, thank you very much, King, we don't need anything you have. That's not really what he said. You can read it if you want. but almost. He literally said, we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. So he cut out the middleman. Our rights didn't trickle down from the king. Our rights came directly to us from God. And he goes on to say that to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men. So we formed a government to secure our God-granted rights, not to issue rights. And he goes on to say that government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. So we delegated certain rights to our government to protect the balance of our rights. Some people read the Bill of Rights and they think it gives them some rights. It doesn't give you any rights. The Bill of Rights was designed to make sure people didn't take away what God gave you. It even says so, if I might paraphrase, the Ninth Amendment says, just because we failed to mention a right here doesn't mean you don't have it. And the 10th says, any right you didn't delegate to some level of government you kept for yourself. So our government was bottom up, not top down. Rights didn't trickle down from the king. Rights came directly from God, and we formed a government to secure those God-granted rights. Now you have people that want to take God out of the classroom, the boardroom, the courtroom, and run him out of the public square. Problem is, God is at the very, very foundation of the government, and you're digging away at the foundation because our whole system was based on God-granted rights. No God, no rights. So I hope to finish the book sometime before this summer, early summer. But I just want to remind you, Hugo Chavez brought change to Venezuela. He didn't bring it with bullets. He brought it with ballots. So pay very close attention to what people are offering and look down the road and pay attention to where you're going. You know, all the presidential debates I watched, and maybe you heard it, but I never heard the word liberty once. Seems to be that nobody cares anymore. And we inherited this nation from people that valued liberty above life itself. You know, remember the quote by Patrick Henry? I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. The New Hampshire flag still says live free or die. The Virginia flag says sic semper tyrannis, thus always to tyrants, and has liberty with the sword at the tyrant's throat. I mean, these were independent folks. It was a Declaration of Independence, not the Declaration of Dependence. In fact, I read my great-grandfather's obituaries. He died in Perry County, not too far from here, in 1919 in the summer. And it said, although he was born in a foreign land, he was intensely American, ready to help the government with anything they might undertake. And I thought, boy, isn't that an interesting concept? Strong people, weak government. You know, today it's constantly, what's the government going to do for you? I mean, even up to John F. Kennedy when he said, ask not what your government can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, basically. With government, countries, almost the same thing. He said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So it wasn't a Democrat or Republican thing. It was just the way Americans thought. It's the way Americans believed. It's what we believed in. So just pay close attention. I really do think this is serious. I mean, we're going to have change. I want change. I want simpler taxes. I've been a fair tax advocate and I was a co-sponsor of the bill when I was there, and I don't make any bones about it. I want us to see us become energy independent. You know, this is crazy. We're financing both sides of the war on terror. We finance the terrorists with our petrodollars, and then we finance the counter-terrorists with our tax dollars. You know, we have to stop buying oil from people that don't like us very well, and we do a lot of that. I want to see manufacturing retained and expanded here in the United States. A lot of economists say, hey, this is not a problem. We're just moving from a manufacturing society to a service society. Folks, a country that can't manufacture the things it needs to defend itself will become defenseless. We can't throw cheeseburgers at them. You know, we have to maintain our manufacturing base. And I'd like to see us make changes in healthcare and how we pay for it. But I'm not willing to become a ward of the state. So God bless every one of you. I appreciate you coming here tonight, and may God continue to bless the United States of America.
Later on 27 Minutes, we will look at some of the Republican candidates that will run for office in the upcoming election. Meanwhile, coming up next year, television as we know it will be in for a big change.